Welcome to the Pro Climber podcast. Today we speak with Sharon Robinson, who's an architectural designer based in Hamilton. She's also a certified passive house designer and homestyle designer. In this interview, Sharon explains the importance of energy modeling your new home to ensure that it is comfortable to live in, as well as being healthy and energy efficient. Pro Climber inspires and educates people to create healthy, durable, and energy-efficient buildings to live, learn, work, and play in. Hi there, Sharon. Welcome today. How are you doing?
Morning, Simon. I'm great. How are you?
I am fantastic. Thank you. All the better for having you on the show today.
Oh, you say the nicest things.
Now, Sharon, just going back, what inspired you to study architectural design?
Oh my gosh. I think architecture chose me before I chose architecture. I can remember drawing house plans as a 7-year-old. My dad was a lawyer, mum was a nurse. I grew up in the country. Architecture wasn't something that was part of my environment. So I'm not quite sure where that came from. And I was an insomniac as a child too, so I would walk through spaces in 3D when I was trying to sleep. I intuitively kind of chose it at 18. I didn't do the homework the career guidance counsellor gave me. I just went, that one. But I think, it just made sense to me, and I've never regretted it. That was a few years ago, but spatial awareness, people wanting to make a difference, that's all kind of part of who I am. So it just naturally aligned really, really well. And looking back, all of those things made sense. But at the time, I think I kind of knew.
Fantastic.
It's a horrible thing to say for somebody that's really struggling with choosing their career, isn't it? But I was incredibly lucky.
I think it's really difficult for anyone trying to find what they need to do in life. I know for me, for example, I almost feel as if it's taken me this long to realize, what I really want to be doing. So it is challenging. Now, when you were studying, obviously there were a whole lot of components to studying design. How much did they talk about the performance of the building, what it was going to be like to live in, energy efficiency, comfort, these sort of things?
From like a building science point of view, none. So I started studying 20 odd years ago. I went to Wintec here in Hamilton. At that stage, it was a 2-year course. I then went off and did my OE. And I came back still wanting to be an architect, even though I haven't quite got there yet. But then I finished a Bachelor of Architectural Studies up at Unitec part-time and graduated, I think, about 2010 with that. So I didn't have a conventional, straightforward architectural learning process. We were taught to consider spaces as how they would feel for a human being to be in them from an architecture school point of view. But the building science has been sort of segregated as a separate discipline for so long. And I mean, bearing in mind that's about 14 years ago, that there wasn't this crossover. I'm hoping that there is now to start that conversation. But, 2 years ago, I started down the passive house route. And that's really when my education in building science came into effect. It kind of put the methodology and the tools behind human comfort into something that was tangible and that I could use as part of the design process. But it was a big learning curve. So I wasn't really prepared for that. We never stop learning, do we, in life? And I guess I'm still on that path. But for me, it didn't happen within architecture school. It happened by an intentional choice in my own business to say, this is what I'm going to learn more about.
Now, when you finished your studies, you went on and worked for a couple of practices. First of all, you'd done all the studying and you'd been dreaming of being an architect and things all your life. How did you find that it lived up in reality once you got started?
Oh, wow. Well, I was working while studying as well, but I've always had this sustainability drive. Some practices talked about it and some practices embodied it a little bit. And I was lucky working for Antanas Prasuta. He really put me into that realm with like the Hokanui Enviro classroom. But some other practices just gave it lip service and then didn't invest in it because doing better takes an investment. And it's one of the key reasons I went out on my own and started Smart Living Spaces, because I wanted to walk the talk. And if you're not given that opportunity in your career, I think you get frustrated and realizing I had to make it happen. on my own. So, it was a really good decision and perhaps a natural progression in my career to end up in the space.
Yes, because many people think that just by approaching, any builder or architect or designer, that they're naturally going to get a home that is going to be warm, dry, healthy, energy efficient, just because it's based on the building code, wouldn't they?
Oh, 100%. And even builders and some architects and some designers still think that the building code is going to give them that because it hasn't been challenged. And we don't historically have data because the building code's an assumptive performance code. If you're using the acceptable solutions, I have to add that quickly. Someone pulled me up about that on social media the other day. But the acceptable solutions is probably where 95%, in my estimation, of homes and buildings sit, because it's a safe path, it's a well-trodden path, it's a low-risk path for designers. And we're all busy doing, so, we do what we know. But there is that assumption both in the profession, and then there's that trust from homeowners and people who are building a home that this person's just going to know what's in their head and what's their desires and just magically make it happen because they don't know the right questions to ask. It's not their realm of expertise. That's why they're going to professionals. So it's both. And then there's also industry players like manufacturers and suppliers who don't understand that either. So that prescriptive nature, that well-trodden prescriptive nature of the building code has meant that we haven't had energy modelling, we haven't had data. So we're still living in this illusion of performance because we haven't quantified it, not to the extent that we need to sort of be able to benchmark it.
Exactly. So what sort of areas of research do you recommend for homeowners when they are looking to build a home, other than looking at the aesthetic side of it and the livability? Where should they be actually going to find out this information about energy efficiency and comfort and durability? And where would they go to learn about this, Sharon?
The place that I send people who inquire with me is to the PINS website. They've got a fantastic download. So PINS is Passive House Institute of New Zealand, because a lot of energy efficiency and healthy, comfortable homes is a passive house concept, and passive house is built on building science. So we have an institution that already can give us that information quite easily and readily. There's a download on my website to that document, and it's written in really good language for homeowners, home builders. So it's not super technical. I think that professionals are very good at talking about this stuff in highly technical terms and jargon, and we lose the people that we need to be helping and communicating to. So that's a really, really good document. The second thing is just to ask your builder or your designer or your architect about energy efficiency and health and comfort and see what they say, because it's not tangible. It's not something we can put into graphics onto a website. It's not something we can put onto social media and graphics. Yeah, and just listen to what they have to say. And it's a 5-minute conversation, or see what they say on social media about it. But arming yourself with both research and talking to people, yeah, I think that's a good start.
And am I right in saying, Sharon, that just because they're going to the Passive House Institute website, that there are a whole lot of things they can learn from that, even if they're not wanting to build a fully Passive House certified building, they may still be able to learn a whole amount of things that they could use in a build that they're wanting to build. Is that correct?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Yeah, 100%.
Now, next question I've got for you is, once you start going down this route, where do you start? Should you approach an architectural designer, an architect, an independent builder, a group home builder? There's all these choices that we've got in front of us. Where would you recommend starting with that process?
I would start with a Homestar and Passive House specialist, an architectural designer or architect that's in the Homestar or Passive House space, or both. I mean, there's other organisations that do this kind of stuff. Some builders who are certified Passive House tradespeople have an understanding of this because they have to for their certification. We are all part of the same team at the end of the day. So when you're starting to design your new home or do your renovation, you're going to need a builder, you're going to need an architectural designer or an architect, you're going to need an engineer, more than likely, and there'll be some other people that you need too. So I would say going to an architectural designer or architect that is in this space of building better is a really, really good place to start.
And some people might be under the impression that that's a more expensive route to go. How would you answer that?
I've done a bit of work for group home builders way back in the beginning of starting my business. And what I figured out is that the design costs are actually hidden in the whole build cost. So you don't actually separate them out. I think one of the problems with talking about building better and building higher performance homes is that the budget allocations are different. And so it's no different from a group home builder giving you a estimated price. And they will only give you a contracted price once they've got working drawings, which will be very different from the initial conversations you might have had with them. But architects and design fees are actually built into their pricing. So you're paying for it regardless, but you have less control over it because you're paying for it through their prescribed systems of specification. So they're very focused, in my experience, on the aesthetics and selling the end product rather than understanding that designing a healthy, comfortable, energy efficient home is actually a process. So potentially more expensive to go to an architectural designer or an architect, but that's just in the consultancy stage. I think at the end product, you can get a much better performing product, which is going to give you reductions in power bills. It's going to give you maybe reductions in medical bills. And the build doesn't necessarily have to be more expensive. I mean, it is a slightly different process. Group home builders, in my experience, haven't invested a lot in energy modelling and building better. They've got a very prescribed way of delivering what they do. So I'd be interested to see how they navigate the Building for Climate Change program that's coming up. And look, some people just want a one-stop shop, but we're not talking to those people. We're talking to people who want to build better. So you need to invest in the professionals who are going to help you do that. So it is slightly more expensive in the short term.
Okay, great. Now, you've spoken a few times about energy modelling. Can you go into a little bit of detail around how that works?
Sure. So we have a section in our building code that is called H1 energy efficiency. And most people benchmark their energy efficiency in their designs off insulation values. So insulation is one part of energy efficiency. It's a crucial part, but it's not the whole part. So what energy modelling does is it takes a look at the whole design and how it's going to perform with, and we'll go into those principles perhaps in a little bit, but it looks at how that whole building is going to perform with regards to its site, with regards to its orientation, with regards to human behaviour too, because there's big things in our building code that don't address the way that we use our spaces, which is when you have performance issues. So energy modelling is data-driven and looks far beyond the tick-the-box 6.6 bat in my ceiling. It actually looks how that particular design is going to perform. So it predicts performance rather than assumes it.
So people may have heard that H1 has recently been upgraded. What are your thoughts about those changes, and are those not going to be giving them the desired outcome that they might believe?
Those changes have been an intermediary step, and it's moving in the right direction. Moving forward the way, and we don't have a lot of information on what the steps are going to be with this Building for Climate Change program. In fact, a lot of people don't even know it's coming into effect. But that's what's driving the H1 changes. There is a pathway to use energy modelling at the moment in H1. It's a verification method, but most people don't use it because it's more work than the tick the box schedule method. So the changes have been a good step, but it's really only around insulation and window R values, that lovely banded around R values word. Moving forward, because it doesn't give us any data with energy modelling, it doesn't give us any data like the energy modelling does. So moving forward, it is a good step, but I think that the schedule and calculation methods, the old way of doing it with the changes that have been implemented with upgrading insulation values, that's going to drop away in a couple of years or 3 or 4 years because it's not going to be able to give a surety of the performance that the targets that are coming into our building code are going to be asking for in the design. So it's a good step, but it's not the whole step.
Great. Now, Can you just go into a little bit more detail of what sort of the key components to a home that's really going to be comfortable, healthy, and energy efficient? Just if you can run us through those key components that come together.
Sure. Well, they're passive house principles, so I'll stick to those. Obviously, insulation is important. We've banded on about that. A second thing is air tightness, which you guys at Proclaimer know very, very well. Air tightness does a number of things, but when we have air moving through insulation, we reduce its efficiency. We also allow moisture into our structural elements, which is not great for mold formation. It's also not great for the performance of the insulation. So that air tightness plays a critical role. I say that we have accidentally airtight homes because if we don't consider it, we're unknowingly creating issues. Quality windows is another passive house principle. We've got these upgrades with thermally broken aluminium. So that's essentially the minimum performing unit you can use. But to quote Benji Simons from Stark, we can take a high performance product and put it into a low performance installation. So addressing windows in terms of where they sit within the thermal envelope's important. Also their orientation and size. You know, they are the weakest part of our thermal envelope, but they also can give us useful gains in terms of solar gains. They can also make our houses overheat. So understanding their configuration, understanding their location and their orientation is quite important. So that they're quite a big element and quite a variable element. The fourth one would be ventilation. We have this lovely little tick the box in the building code that says 5% of habitable rooms need to have opening windows. But I think a study by Cara Rosemere from Auckland for her thesis, she's in the passive house world, something like 12 to 15% of the time we can rely on climatic conditions to naturally ventilate our homes. And my first question was, is it day? Is it night? Is it winter? Is it summer? Are we home or are we at work? So suddenly our spaces aren't getting the 0.35 air changes that we need per hour as stipulated by our building code. So having a ventilation system means that that definitely happens. Having a heat recovery ventilation system means that we can recover the desirable heat in our spaces. So we're being energy efficient, but also we're still ensuring that we get the moisture from inside our homes removed because we give off moisture. I think we breathe out 3 litres of moisture a day with our breath. So we can remove the moisture, we can get fresh air to breathe, and we can also transfer that heat to dry air, which is better. It's easier and cheaper to heat. It's also healthier for us to breathe. And the fifth one was thermal bridging, which is slightly more complicated, but that basically is eliminating the weak spots in the structure in your enclosure at construction stage so that you're basically plugging the leaks before you create them in your thermal envelope.
Fantastic. Now, you mentioned earlier air tightness, and we get a lot of people coming and saying, well, I live in New Zealand, I want this indoor-outdoor flow, and I don't want to feel like I'm trapped in a bubble. How would you explain that to a prospective homeowner?
Yeah. You can move in and out of a passive house and you can open up the doors and windows. Absolutely. The reality is we do that in summer and we do that during the day. It's counterintuitive to human behavior to open up your doors and windows wide open in the middle of winter when you've got your heating going. And it's counterintuitive to leave them wide open when you're going to sleep at night. So the air tightness assists in the ventilation. It means you're not getting air movement through your structure. It also means that your ventilation unit is working as efficiently as it can, because that can only work efficiently if the environment that it sits works efficiently. So you'd probably close up your doors and windows at night. Also, if your neighbors are having a party, you could have acoustic and security. To rely on doors for natural ventilation, we need that most of all at night, because that's when we need to purge our spaces. That's when we spend the most amount of time in our homes. And no one's going to sleep with their doors and windows wide open, particularly not in an urban environment. So the air tightness and the ventilation is important for the times when we do close up our homes. But it doesn't mean to say that we can't open them up when we want to. It just means they're well supported when we don't.
Awesome. Now, Sharon, we hear a lot of talk on the news and everything around rising building costs. How do we balance the cost of building with building better?
This is such a tough one. We have historically looked at building costs in such a narrow band. And my argument with people who are claiming building better is more expensive is, what are you comparing it to? A few things. A more efficient home is going to have a simpler form, because you're considering the built form and the spaces that you're enclosing and how they're performing. So taking the average New Zealand, our housing typology hasn't changed for the last 4 years with our standalone homes. Taking one of those and turning it into a high performing house is going to be expensive. Designing with performance in mind right from the start means that those design decisions are already made. So that's a way of bringing the costs into a line. The other thing is, we have this magic square meter rate, which no one actually knows what's included in it, and assumes the minimum, I'm fairly certain, because it tells people the answer they want to hear. We have different budgets. If you're putting in a heat recovery ventilation unit and air tightness membranes, you're going to be putting in insulation in any case. If you're going for higher quality windows with a higher quality installation, some of that stuff comes out of different budgets, because how much does a homeowner spend on air conditioners, heating panels, heaters? I would even argue, if you had a firewood, and energy bills. There's stuff that's coming into an energy efficient home that traditionally has been in a different budget. So it will be a slightly more expensive than doing the minimum. I think anything in life doing more than the minimum requires a little bit more of whether it's effort or cost. But I think people are blowing it out of proportion for the sake of an excuse to stay the same when they're comparing what we've always done and then think that energy efficiency is added to that, when it's actually a completely different way of doing something.
And isn't it also about considering the amount of square meters that we're building, and do we need all these bedrooms? Are we going to use them? Do we need, these extra rooms and things? Or might we cut down in some areas to perhaps improve the overall quality, comfort, and durability of our building?
It's actually really easy to get a passive house certified that's large. It's actually harder when it's small. I think that the size thing will be driven by a number of factors. First of all, we're moving into a more dense urban model for our cities. Secondly, cost is going to drive size too. I think we've gone away from the 3-bedroom model of maybe like the 1990s or 1980s into this 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, double garage, 2 living areas as an average family home. Land is going to be an issue too in terms of building smaller. So there's other factors, I think, that are putting pressure on that. But it seems a smart idea. I haven't got data to back it up, but it seems like a smart idea to build smaller, isn't it? To build better but smaller. But there will be this equilibrium zone, if you like, where size and efficiency meet each other. And that depends on the design and the context that it's sitting in. And is it medium density? Is it standalone? So yes, building small is definitely better coming from what we have been creating. But I don't think energy efficiency is going to be the only driver for that. I think there's other factors that are probably a little bit more dominant in those decisions. And that's just my opinion.
Now, I was watching some of your social media. You were talking something about that the banks may be offering some improvements in rates and things was it for Homestar-based homes?
So can I just provide the link between Homestar and Passive House? Because it's not either or. So Passive House is an international standard for healthy, comfortable, energy efficient homes, and probably talks more to the energy efficient side of the building code. That it's not environmentally friendly. I get a lot of people get confused about the two. Homestar is a New Zealand tool that's been developed by the New Zealand Green Building Council. Although there is a World Green Building Council, we have our own chapter, if you like, and they've developed this tool that looks at the social, environmental, and financial sustainability of a development. So it's far more than just energy efficiency. It's connections to community, it's on-site amenities, it's things like native planting, fruit trees. It's addressing the local issues that we are facing in our built environment in New Zealand. So a passive house can be used for Homestar credits. They work together. In fact, Echo, the energy modelling software that Homestar uses, is a simplistic version of PHPP, or Passive House Planning Package. So they work together. But because it's a New Zealand tool, The New Zealand Green Building Council have done amazing work with going to talk to the banks. ANZ's been the first one that's come on board, but I do know that they're having conversations with other lending partners to say, look, you're getting a rated product that sits above the minimum quality, so you've got more surety with what you're lending this to. So there is at the moment currently from ANZ a 0.7% reduction on your fixed mortgage rate if you are Homestar 6 or above. 6 is the minimum. So 6 is slightly better than building code. And then added in some other stuff, of course. And I think it's 1% on floating. And, particularly at this time with interest rates hurting people, I think that's definitely something to consider. And you get a home that's rated. So if you're selling it on, we love talking about building homes for resale value all the time and overcapitalization. It gives you a benchmark that sets you above with certification from maybe the house next door. So I think it's a fantastic initiative by ANZ, and I'm really hopeful that other banks are going to come to the party because we need the carrot and the stick for doing better.
Great. Now, you mentioned earlier changes that are moving towards 2030. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So there is a Building for Climate Change program. It's not been talked about too much. Brands has just done a seminar series around the country. Basically, we're moving from this assumed performance model into more of a data-driven prescribed performance model. But there's ratings that are coming in. I don't know the dates. If somebody does know the dates, I'd love to know them. But I'm assuming around about 2026, we're going to see 60 kilowatt per square metre annum cap on energy use in the home. And I can't tell you exactly what is entitled in that, but I guess that will become clearer as we move forward. And it'll drop down to, is it 60 for space heating? So 60 for space heating. Sorry, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I don't have the graphs in front of me. So what we're doing every 2 years is basically halving our energy use and our space heating and space cooling. We don't talk about space cooling enough in our homes. And so initially, I think the first step to 2026 will be relatively easy. But remember, we're going from 60 down to 15 in 4 years for space heating. 15 kilowatt hours per square metre annum is a passive house target. It's a passive house maximum. So you cannot use any more than that. So we're going to be seeing, I suspect by 2028, a lot of people really having to refine what they're doing and refine their designs. And that is what's coming in. It's the Building for Climate Change part that I'm very familiar with is the operating carbon. So that is the energy that we use in our homes. There is also the embodied carbon. So moving forward, we're going to have to quantify, and I suspect at consent stage, materials that we're choosing, their life cycle kind of analysis of the carbon that they've used in their production and the carbon that they're embodying or replacing. So we're now evaluating embodied carbon and operating carbon moving forward, and it will become mandated.
Fantastic. Now, we've talked a lot about new builds. What about renovations? What are the options there?
Renovations are the hard one. There is a retrofit program that's scheduled for 2040 for our existing homes. Renovations are a real challenge because, as you know, installing airtightness means ripping off all of your wall linings. And it's the most expensive build performance just in terms of consultants' costs as well as construction costs. But it's going to have to happen because, we've got such a large housing stock. Yeah, it is a real tricky one. I mean, thermal bridging is a massive challenge in renovations because you've got to work with what's there currently. Insulation gets harder to make more continuous. So therefore your ventilation systems and your heat recovery systems aren't as efficient. So we'll see. I mean, Passive House has an ENERFIT standard that people are using. So it's not impossible. I think we need to get it right in the new build space first, but certainly we can be renovating better. We certainly can be, and it would be great. New Zealand Green Building Council has a home fit program, and you can have home fit designers and home fit assessors. I'm not in that space. I chose the Homestar space. That, I think, will start to generate a rating system around homes too, but I think everyone's focused on the new builds for the moment to see what the lessons are learnt and then how we can apply them to the existing housing stock.
Fantastic, Sharon. Just to summarize, we've talked about the importance of energy modeling so that people actually get an idea of the amount of efficiency of that specific build. We've talked about shopping around, finding someone that is going to listen to you and understand your requests around energy efficiency and comfort and these things. So is there anything I've missed out? Is there anything you'd like to just add to that?
My piece of advice if you're wanting to build a new home is it's very easy to build to what the market historically has been and what the market is proclaiming to be at the moment. Ask yourself, what is your house going to be worth in 2030? A certified passive house is on the operating levels, energy-wise, of where we're going in 2030. So do you consider your house an investment? I think we put more consideration into the performance of the cars that we buy than we put into the houses that we are creating. And our homes are our largest financial investment that we make in our lives. We spend 30 years paying off that mortgage. And if we don't pay off the mortgage of the original house that we've built, we'll be paying off a mortgage of another house, for average Joe Bloggs. Yeah, you wouldn't invest in the poorest performing stock on the stock market just because you could get a lot of stock. You'd be considering the performance of that stock for your retirement. So our houses should be no different. But there is this perception that the building code creates, as you said, an energy efficient, comfortable, healthy house, and that's an assurity of that. But the reality is it's not. It's the minimum standards. They brought it in after World War II, I think, to set a minimum level of quality in the market. And that has become the standard, not the minimum. So ask yourself, do I want my house to be valuable in 2030? It's not that far away. That would be the biggest question. And then that kind of opens up, okay, what do I need to be doing?
Fantastic, Sharon. Thank you so much for your time today, and I'm sure we'll be hearing more from you in the future.
Oh, thank you, Simon. Thank you for this opportunity.
Sharing knowledge is at the heart of our strategy to make buildings better for everyone. Sign up for our podcasts to learn more about creating healthy living conditions by protecting building structures from external and internal moisture damage. Thanks for listening. Looking forward to having you with us next time.